I think that in the next 5 years, I think year by year, we're going to go through a time warp. You're going to see radical disorder in the next 5 years as each one of those things comes to pass. First with the elections as we have, then we have the conflict with the geopolitical conflict, then we have the climate issue, which, by the way, is a very expensive issue. We should talk about how costly that issue is. And then we're going to have this issue of technology, which can provide the greatest miracle, but also is a weapon.
Ray Dalio is a billionaire investor, hedge fund manager, and the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, which he founded in New York in 1975. Dalio is predicting that the next 5 years leading toward the end of the 2020s will be particularly chaotic and instrumental to the making of the New World Order. In his 2021 New York Times bestseller, The Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fail, Dalio explains that the success of nations depends on cycles that can be compared to business cycles. A strong empire or dynasty begins to rise steadily until it overpowers the current superpower. Then, it becomes the new superpower, amassing enough wealth and influence which ironically contribute to its eventual collapse. According to Dalio's postulations and summations arrived at after a careful study of the past 5 centuries in human history, the collapse of every rising nation is inevitable. Dalio says the collapse of every nation, empire, dynasty is 100% certain almost as soon as that nation or empire is birthed. As a result, the billionaire investor is not only certain that the United States, the current global superpower, is heading for an eventual collapse, he also believes this collapse is much closer than many people believe. In his book, Dalio postulates that the rise and fall of empires happen in 3 phases. The rise, when a country gains power and designs a working system. The top, when it is able to sustain the successes that fueled its rise. According to Dalio, this stage is the beginning of the end. The last stage is the decline, when the country's debts become too large for it to continue borrowing to repay its debts. This stage is marked by periods of economic downturns, wide political gaps, increasing internal and external conflict and tensions. It's easy to see what stage the U.S. is in at the moment. Dalio recently spoke at the 2023 All-In Summit at Los Angeles, where he discussed the rise and fall of nations and the changing world order. Between the banking sector crisis, the country's overwhelming debt, and the constant threat to the dollar's dominance by China and Russia, Dalio is convinced that we are about to witness the end of another great empire, and China is going to take its place. Before we go deeper into the video, as well as bring you clips from Ray Dalio's speech at the summit, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos. Thanks, and enjoy. At the summit, Dalio shares an animated clip with charts and detailed analysis of the rise and fall of 4 great empires: the Dutch, British, United States, and Chinese empires. There is a discernible pattern here. As one superpower is declining, another is rising, and it eventually overtakes the failing empire. It happened with the Dutch and the British and the United States, and Dalio is certain that the same is now happening with the United States and China. Here is a summary of the events that transpire during the rise and fall of a great empire, according to the popular billionaire investor.
Let's now look at the typical sequence of events going on inside a country that produces these rises and declines. In a nutshell, the big cycle typically begins after a major conflict, often a war, establishes the new leading power and the new world order. Because no one wants to challenge this power, a period of peace and prosperity typically follows. As people get used to this peace and prosperity, they increasingly bet on it continuing. They borrow money to do that, which eventually leads to a financial bubble. The empire's share of trade grows, and when most transactions are conducted in its currency, it becomes a reserve currency, which leads to even more borrowing. At the same time, this increased prosperity distributes wealth unevenly, so the wealth gap typically grows between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts, which leads to the printing of money and increased internal conflict between the rich and the poor, which leads to some form of revolution to redistribute wealth. This can happen peacefully or as a civil war. While the empire struggles with this internal conflict, its power diminishes relative to external rival powers on the rise. When a new rising power gets strong enough to compete with the dominant power that is having domestic breakdowns, external conflicts, most typically wars, take place. Out of these internal and external wars come new winners and losers. Then the winners get together to create the new world order, and the cycle begins again.
So three things started to happen in my lifetime, our lifetimes, that never happened before, and I needed, therefore, to study them in history. The first is the amount of debt and money creation. Huge amounts of debt and money creation. Does that matter? What is the rise and decline of a reserve currency? How does that all work? I needed to see the cycles for that. The second was the amount of internal political conflict, in particular populism of the left and populism of the right. And a populist is a person who will not accept losing. They fight with their contingency, and that dysfunction and that lack of willingness to lose then had January 6th came out after the book, and there's a dynamic that we're going on for that. And the third, of course, is the great power conflict. In other words, the rise of a comparable economic and military power in the form of China rising and competing with the United States, which is also changing that world order. Those three things never happened in my lifetime, but are big things that are affecting things. When I went back in history, I said I needed to study how these things work. Sometimes we overlook the really big things. So I went back and I studied that, and I saw that there were two others that had enormous impact. The two others were acts of nature, in particular drought, floods, and pandemics. And they killed more people, and they toppled more empires and changed more world orders than anything. And certainly, big issue. Now, and then number 5 is technological changes and how they evolve. So I needed to study those 5 forces. I saw that there's this cycle that repeats over for good cause-effect relationships. I don't believe in a cycle just because it repeats. I started to understand the cause-effect relationships.
To measure an empire's power, Dalio used 8 metrics, and each country's measure of total power is derived by averaging them together. The metrics are education, inventiveness, and technology, competitiveness in the global market, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. Dalio adds that there is a cause and effect relationship between these metrics. Better education means stronger technology, which in turn leads to competitiveness in the global market, more economic output, and so on. Consequently, a worsening of the first metric starts a chain of reaction that leads to the empire's eventual decline. While speaking at the summit, Dalio points out some specific signs of decline applicable to the United States' situation at the moment. Here are more clips.
For any country, and quite often many countries, because they go through the cycle together, as they did in the 30s, what happens is debt rises relative to incomes. And what that means mechanistically is that debt service payments rise relative to incomes. And so it squeezes out consumption as this compounds. And what happens is there's a realization that they have to print money. So I think you're going to see in the next downturn another move to print money. There are certain things that are going on now that means that the big risk comes when they don't want to hold those bonds anymore, okay? Because the supply-demand, think about that supply-demand. It has a deficit. It has to borrow, and so it sells its bonds. Who are the buyers of the bonds? Why do they buy? The buyers of the bonds buy because there's an attractive return. Not only do you have to sell those amounts of bonds, but when they start to realize that I'm not getting good returns on those bonds, they can sell those bonds. There are $31 trillion of bonds.
What would they own instead?
They always own tangible things, and those things can also be, it could be equities, it could be many other things. It could be gold, okay? Gold has always been accepted as a money because nobody else is there's a saying, gold is the only asset you can have that, not somebody else's liability. In other words, you're dependent on getting paid. Right. You can have that at intrinsic value, and for a long period of time, it's been valued, and you can move it between countries. But also, different countries prosper. So you'll see the countries, some of the countries that we mentioned, they will prosper through that.
So Ray, I think I fundamentally agree with your critique that America is looking more and more like a late-stage empire. Like a late-stage Roman Empire, we have this massive debt and we're debasing our currency. Like the Roman Empire, we have all these, far-flung military wars, which we lose, all over the world. We're racked by internal division. So I think I agree with that part of it. At the same time, we do seem to be really good still at technological innovation. In the last year, we've had this breakthrough with, AI, with large language models. I'm wondering, well, first of all, is that a mirage, or do you agree with that? And then if you do agree that we're still really good at technology, is there anything in the historical pattern that's like that, where you have an empire that's declining in every visible way, except for the one that really undergirds our power, which is technology?
Well, the late 20s in the United States is such a good classic example. We had more innovations, more all of these cycles. If I was to go back to the Industrial Revolution, late 1800s, and then you turn, and you create, when there's a lot of debt and a big wealth gap, you have in 1907, you have the Panic of 1907, boom, you have you have this internal conflict, and you had the First World War. In the 20s, you had the same kind of late 20s. It was an era of great inventiveness. The other things matter.
So just because we're really great at innovation isn't going to save us if all these other things are broken.
It's a wonderful thing, but ultimately, we as a society, in aggregate, are spending a lot more money than we're earning. So if we're doing such a good job on that technology or whatever it is, why is that happening? Okay, so now when you look at the debt, do you want to own the debt? Do you want to own that? When those who don't want to own it, then you have a financial problem. When you have a financial problem at the same time as you have a wealth gap and populism, that's a dangerous combination.
Dalio is certain that the collapse of the United States is inevitable. He is also certain that as the signs of these collapse become clearer, more investors, especially big institutions, will move money out of U.S. treasuries and into more tangible assets like gold. This has already started with central banks, which have been on a gold buying spree for over a year now. They are at the forefront of these issues, so they know many things that we do not. By the time everyone catches on and shrugs off the normalcy bias we are deeply steeped in, things would have gotten much worse. But not for investors that take this small window of opportunity left to keep stacking. Please share your thoughts and comments on Dalio's summations in his speech. Do you agree that the United States is heading for an inevitable collapse and that China is a strong contender as the next global power? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Also, ensure you smash the like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks for watching.